All right, we are rolling. So I have the chaplain Jesse Sabatar. I keep wanting to make it more eccentric.
Then you got to go Zevatar, make it exciting.
There you go, Sabatar. You're author of a book, His Kingdom Comes in Power, as well as having done a lot of interviews, podcasts. You do right on radio. Your website, Illuminate the Darkness, is a great source of information. You've been on Sarah Westall's show quite a bit. So, um, it's interesting because I was recommended to you and started listening to your story, and it's like it's certainly you can, I feel like you can connect a lot of dots for us and help us understand this satanic empire. Um, let's start by just giving us, I'm sure you've gone into this a lot before, but just give us a little bit of an introduction into your personal experience as much as you can relate.
Yeah. Are you wanting just like the childhood history or
Yeah,
just
actually,
like a general
were you
overflow?
were you born into this world and how essentially your younger years, yeah, what that was like.
Yeah. So I was born into what we would call the bloodline families, and they go by many names, commonly the elite, the cabal, the Illuminati, the Brotherhood. So I was born into the higher escalons of that group and was chosen at age 4.5 for a very specific position in that world. Um, my proctor, who is a family member, is one of the Queen Mothers of Darkness. And so, one of the things that I really bring out as I'm speaking about this group is the structure. How do they operate? How do they work? Um, where are they working? How does it connect between the physical, the spiritual? And so, that was kind of my beginnings were, those relationships with my proctor that beyond my control, I was chosen by, these individuals who are part of what I call this system that serves Lucifer. And Lucifer chose me very specifically for end time things and to help set things in place. And so, that training began at age 4.5. Um, Unbeknownst to him originally, the Lord was working behind the scenes. So I mix in a lot of my faith with my story. I was saved at age 3, so a year and a half before I was thrown into this occultic world and trained in the system. I had come to the Lord, and so I knew the difference between good and evil, light and dark, and really it became my training was a battleground, we could say. Um, I went through training with some of my other teachers that are, I brought forward some of their names. Um, we had, John Brennan, Michael Aquino, Michael Karkok, who was a Nazi. He was the Ukrainian Legion of Defense leader for Hitler. And then I had on the witchcraft side individuals like Gloria Vanderbilt and Laurie Cabot Kent. So those were my main teachers in the black arts, we'll call it. So all of them, were, I don't know what to call it besides an agenda. They all knew this Luciferian end time agenda.
Yeah.
And had been given prophecies and different things that, told them the series of events. And their job was to prepare and get everything ready in the economy, financially, in the system and, move everything in that direction for this big end time system.
So, are you familiar with John Todd's testimony?
Yes.
Does that resonate as far as, was it similar what he claimed he was born into as far as the covens?
It's similar in some ways. in some ways it's different. My family was at the very top of the system. So you had the five mothers of darkness, and then you have the Satanic Council, which is all the heads of the 13 bloodline families. And then you have a 14th bloodline, which is the hidden bloodline, the Muslim Brotherhood. So, what he's describing is kind of what happens in the groups underneath those, we'll call it departments in the system. So it's
Right.
a little different.
He was really talking. I remember, hearing it years ago and just being fascinated because he talks about how they were controlling music, and in particular, what he was associated with was the control of music. And as we know, how music is magic, and the frequency and vibration of what was put out, and how so much of it is designed to basically put people into negative frequencies or to hypnotic states. And a lot of it is encoded. I've heard about rituals done around music masters where they actually do like bring in black magicians to like cast spells on the master itself, right? And then cast it to the masses. So in terms of, well, another person I want to bring up then is, you mentioned the 13 families. There's a Fritz Springmeier work on the 13 bloodlines. Does that correspond to the families, or is it actually different than the families that he talks about?
No, what he says is very, very similar. There's a few differences. I have talked with Fritz, and we've talked through those differences. So there were some of the major families or names that would fall under those categories. He had kind of seen as, non-important or in the background. What he kind of displays are the face front of the system. So they're true people, the powerhouses. Like, you can think of individuals, like there's some that they bring forward that are kind of the face front of the system. Like Gloria Vanderbilt was somebody that was out in public. She was well known. She lived a very wealthy life. But the real hierarchy people are behind the scenes. They live among us. There would be nothing distinguishing in their lives that would, let you know that they're into this Luciferianism. A lot of them have, very strong cover lives that revolve around Christianity or the Catholic life. And, you would just see them as a regular person. They're taught to live without the excess, yet, whatever they need is available to them. So, these higher families, they don't live wealthy. They're not publicly out there. People aren't going to recognize their faces. And that's part of, to protect the system, to protect who's really doing the programming and the running and the coordinating and organizing of everything.
And so what is this Luciferian system about? What is their belief system?
Well, at the core of it, it's all about Satan or Lucifer's agenda. They really don't love God, and they want to see this agenda fulfilled. They're promised all sorts of things, fame, money, fortune. But above that, they're promised knowledge that's not of this world. And they're promised eternal life. That's the biggest thing, that with that eternal life, it's not just that you'll live forever. It's that you are a God, and you will, rule as a God. So that's what they strive for. And, in the backdrop, Satan's agenda has always been that he will usurp the throne of God, that he will sit upon the throne as God. And when that happens, he will, make all of those who follow him gods. That's his promise. I can tell you it's quite different, that he's a liar, that he's, told me to my face that he intends to kill everybody. His goal is just to get his demonic army through those spiritual gates. And once he does, you know, he plans to try to take over the throne of God, and he'll do away with all of the human hosts that have helped to get his legions of demons through the gate.
So the idea of the human hosts are essentially people allowing themselves to be possessed by demonic forces, and in the process of service, basically by serving that Luciferian or satanic energy and force. Essentially, they're allowing themselves to host it. Right? Is that the idea?
That's the idea. Both, you know, if we talk about what the demons or the fallen angels really are, you know, they were angels that, you know, chose not to serve God and were cast from heaven. And they have spiritual gifts just like we do. So, one of the things that the system does is, you know, they want to line up humans that have the same spiritual gifts as those fallen angels. Because when you work together in conjunction with one another, um, those spiritual gifts are amplified. So that's why you see all the gift testing, all the different testings that go on in schools. The different games are formulated, you know, whether it's online games or it used to be board games. Um, you know, they do all these series of testing to see who can connect where spiritually. And, you know, the goal is always to amplify those spiritual gifts. So in a sense, you're a host, but it's much deeper than that, because it's not just like you're an empty shell or a shell with a spirit that this other being is just kind of coming in and shoving that spirit to the side. There's, at a quantum level, there's an entanglement. You come into agreement with this spirit, and the spirit, you know, operates at a spiritual level with both your physical body and your spiritual body.
Precisely. And so, is that the reason for these like blood rituals, sacrifice? I mean, is this actually feeding demonic entities with the blood of humans, or is this simply more, how do you say, is it a mixture of feeding demonic entities as well as basically proving allegiance?
It can have multiple reasons. So it can be, you know, the entities are very bloodlusty. It's their way. It's kind of a mockery to God that they, you know, Scripture says that the life is in the blood. And so, you know, when they consume that, what they believe philosophically is that, you know, that when they consume it, it becomes a part of themselves, that they take ownership of that. So it gives them, you know, ties to the individual whose blood they've taken in the spiritual realm. And they believe that gives them more, you know, power, more access. So whoever that individual has been connected to, whatever land they've walked, you've kind of opened a big can of worms here. You know, because the blood is what gives us authority, dominion. And so it's about that dominion. And when they drink that blood, wherever that person has walked, wherever they've been, they believe it gives them access to that land and that dominion that that individual had. So, like, we could go further. Like, so for them, you know, a physical display of that is, you know, we've got the Red Shoe Club. Some of that's been brought forward. We know that, you know, the Pope is somebody who wears the red shoes with the Jesuits. And so when he gets shoes, they come from a very particular victim that he's chosen. And if you think about it, it's kind of a dual meaning. You know, shoes have soles. And scripture tells us that wherever the soles of your feet trod, the Lord has given you that land. So what happens is when they take that victim's life and they make him into a pair of shoes, they're physically mocking God, saying, now, I get permission and I have rights to fight for the land wherever this person has trod. And so when they go into the heavenly throne room, they fight for those rights in the heavenly places and fight for the footholds that they have, which they use for evil and wickedness, um, versus as God intended. It was meant to for us to bring righteousness and to put an end to wickedness and evil in the land.
It's wild. It occurred to me the Tom, when he mentioned the red shoes, it reminded me of the man with the one red shoe, the Tom Hanks movie, like his first breakout movie that he starred in.
Yeah.
Just um the okay, so what, and the pedophilia then, like, why is this such a, is this feeding on the purity of innocence, the pure energy of children? Is that, is that the reason why so many of these cultists are, engaging in pedophilia?
Um, well, there's two reasons. The first is that the enemy uses that as a form of blackmail. That you know, nobody. Well, I can't say nobody. I guess I would say 5% of the individuals who are involved in this system really want to be there. You do just have people who, to be honest, their hearts are wicked, and that's what they desire. But the other 95% don't. And so the enemy has to find a way to meld individuals' wills to do what he wants them to do. So, that's one of their most common forms is they start off with, different forms of blackmail, and it eventually will evolve to, where they get you drugged or drunked or roofied, and they get a picture of you with a child. And then from there, um, it kind of, it's like you have a choice, at that point. Are you going to be in the system or are you not? If you're going to be in the system, everything under the sun that you could desire or want is going to be offered to you. If you choose not to be in the system, the threat is death to you, and most of all to anybody you love or anything you love. They will start to take away everything and torture you until you decide to give in and be part of the system. So, once you're in the system, it becomes a quota. The enemy has different quotas that vary in the depth of evil. So you always start off in the lighter things, which a lighter thing would be the blackmail picture, with the child. And then the next time it's going to be, well, no, now you've actually got to commit the act if you don't want to lose your family members. And there, it has to be documented. There needs to be picture proof or video proof. Like, you can't just say you've done these things. So, this is how the quota system of entanglement begins. And it just continues to escalate further and further to the point of, the enemy doesn't want you just to participate and just do what you need to do to get by. He purposely sets it up where it escalates, and then his goal is to get you to the point where you are willingly participating, and not only willingly participating, you are applauding others to partake. You're recruiting and bringing other people into the system to keep it going. So that's the first aspect of that. With the Remind me again exactly how you asked that question in the beginning, because I want to make sure I cover both parts fully in here.
Well, just in terms of the feeding on the energy of children, energy, is that part of why the pedophilia takes place? Is it, does it have to do with energy feeding, basically, for the sexual energy of a young child, the purity of a young child? Is that, you're just trying to understand why is it so common amongst
Right.
the elite, essentially?
So the second part of that is what's behind it. That you've got the enemy's end time agenda that he wants to usurp the throne of God. In order to do that, he has to get his demonic hosts back into heaven. And he has to do that through the spiritual gates. Um, you know, when they were cast down to earth, there was a veil that was put up between the spiritual entities being able to go back into the throne room of God. Satan is allowed back in there, but not with his demonic host. So how do the spiritual gates operate? And this is important to that question. Scripture tells us that we enter the gates with thanksgiving in our heart. Thanksgiving, emotions, feelings, everything on earth resonates a frequency, a resonance, has a harmonic song. Okay, so the spiritual gates operate at that frequency of thanksgiving. The enemy cannot be thankful to open the gates. The true thankfulness is gone because they've all been cast out of heaven. They've been cast from the presence of God. So, what's the closest thing that they can get to that same frequency that will open those spiritual gates? And that's delight or ecstasy. Okay. Now, why they choose the young is because that initial reaction, that initial feeling is what's going to get them that frequency to open those gates. So now you have really what they're doing with the pedophilia. It's not about necessarily lust or a sick desire to harm children. Like it's about that sex magic. And to appease Satan, to appease the demons, to reach those higher levels in that system, you have to be good at sex magic. And unfortunately, the only way they can get that is, they have to involve children. Um, so that's kind of the way, I don't know how else to explain it, but that's really what's behind this, is that drive to open and operate the spiritual gates.
And in terms of your own story, I mean, I know you mentioned when you were young being involved with sort of stargates or portals or this kind of working. You mentioned Michael Aquino, and can
Mm-hmm.
you elaborate on some of what that was about, essentially what you were being tasked with and what you came to understand?
Yeah, with that, I'm going to actually be doing a huge show on that this upcoming Friday on the Reveal Report. Um, but basically, what's behind it is that with my position, I had to work hand in hand with individuals, who were operating and getting things ready with the system with that end time agenda. So part of my role was that, on a certain date, I was supposed to perform a certain ritual and hand the system over to the Antichrist. Um, so all of that training with Aquino, with Brennan, was all in prep for getting things ready to hand over that system to the Antichrist and to open the spiritual gates. Um, as they did testing and stuff for me as a child, they realized that I could hear and see and feel in the spiritual realm. So that ability, everybody has that ability. Um, a lot of times the system will kind of squash it, they'll push it down. They don't want people to know or acknowledge that they can hear, see, and feel in the spirit realm. So, I was one of those kids that I wasn't going to just pretend it was imagination when I was hearing or seeing things. I was very literal. And, with my testing, it started with my proctor and different teachers. They would ask me, do you hear what the spirits are saying? And I would be like, yes. And then they would say, well, tell us, what were they saying? And so I'd have to repeat back word for word what I had heard the entity saying. Well, finally, I got tired of, you know, of kind of this game that they were playing. And so I just started, I as I heard things, I just started blurting it out, and a lot of it was stuff that, might have been private communications between these demons and their hosts and stuff they didn't want everybody to know. And I would just be like, this is what was said. And so that, became a problem for them. Um, and so they ended up putting me then, like kind of the next step after they knew that I had those gifts, that they were pretty refined. They started me off in the Looking Glass project. So with that project, they will have children with core groups of 3. Usually it's a girl and 2 boys. And the girl will have skills that basically it's that, you hear, see, and feel in the spirit world. They kind of twist it a little bit and they call that gift clairvoyance. So what they want to do is, with the system, they set you up with this spiritual gate, and you basically communicate with this spirit, and all 3 of you are kind of in this communication in the spiritual world. Like you're pulled, I don't know how to explain it other than you're pulled into the spirit world. People are pulled into that spiritual engagement in different ways. So, some of the children are what we call, they're all, I guess they classify them technically as remote viewers, but some remote view through astral projection. So literally their physical body will be one place, but their spirit enters into that spiritual world. The others of us, it's our spirit does not leave our body. And so literally it's like we're seeing a vision or a dream. So we see both the physical world and the spiritual world at the same time, and can interact in both worlds at the same time, versus someone whose spirit leaves their body and they're astral projecting. They can't operate in the physical world while they're operating in the spiritual world. They're bound to either be operating in one or the other. So, my core group, all 3 of us were, remote viewers with vision. And so we would see almost the exact same thing. So they would have us, interacting. But they particularly, pick it where you're all seeing the same vision, but you see different aspects of the vision. So for me, like I would always see whatever the end result was going to be. So whatever we're seeing, I see the end result. My training partner, he would see, all the steps that are going to happen. He couldn't see the end result, but he would see like all the series of events that led up to that end event. And then he would see the consequences. Like if that happened, then this would be the outcome. If that happened, this would be the outcome. But he wouldn't know which was the final outcome. And then the other boy who was with us, he just saw, this and this and this and this are going to happen. So what they do, they purposely pick 3 children, who perceive things those way, because that it's like serves as a triple check for them. They then do what we call biofeedback, where you, after the vision, you go with somebody and you word for word describe or draw pictures exactly what you saw, heard, and felt. And then they compare those 3 notes. And by comparing, it's like, okay, this kid saw this is going to happen first, this is going to happen second, this is going to happen third. This kid saw, this is going to happen first, second, third, but he also saw these other things. And if those things happen, this will be the result. And then the last kid sees this is the result. And so when they started to compare things in that way, what they tried to do then was change time. Like, if we don't want this to be the end result, which step do we need to try to change in order to get a different outcome? So that's the premise of Looking Glass, is they're trying to play with time, trying to dictate what God has ordained. To find three kids that can actually give biofeedback that's close to each other is kind of hard. Our group was probably one of the higher level groups. Me and my training partner gave 100% feedback. So that meant that everything that we said was, could be comparable. It was like telling the whole story. And then the third child with us, he was the closest they could find to us, but his biofeedback was he saw only 60% of what we reported. And then they would connect us as you get further in this. Then they would connect you with different military generals or soldiers who were in these PSYOP remote viewing programs. And so then the next phase was Star Wars Now. So you would be interacting with military individuals who could be part of the Jedi program, Sunstreak, Flame Grill, the Phoenix Project, any of those. And you would start interacting with those individuals, interfacing with those spiritual gates. And at that point, they would teach you to operate in that spiritual world. It's like, okay, we've got somebody we need to locate. Where is that person? And you would start learning through your remote viewing how to locate those people and how to assess, what is the condition of that person? Where are they at? What do they need? Are they okay? What are they doing? What are they saying? It got quite interesting. We had one individual who, was part of our group, who used hawks, and the hawks could travel through the spirit world to other countries. They would watch from the rafters, and the hawks had learned, to recognize symbols in order. And so they could come back and they could, type with their beak, or, they'd have different, sometimes boards that these birds would use, and they could just, repeat from memorization what they had seen, if it was like in written form on somebody's desk. So this was a way they were doing spying and different things like that. One of those individuals, I can't say names, but he has come forward now with some stuff. And so it's interesting, the things that they can do. So those were the first two levels. And then once you get past Star Wars Now, where you're able to open the spiritual gates, you're able to enter them on your own, you can close them, and operate in and out of those. Then you go into the Voice of God project, and that's the higher levels. It's going to be the Phoenix Project, and some of Sunstreak, and Artemis, some of those other ones like that. And you're going to be fully operating in that world. You'll be getting missions. You'll have a team that you work with. You have objectives. And, their goal with that, when they start off, a lot of what they display and publicly or not publicly, I'll say among the government individuals, they advertise that really the premise of that group is to have operational warriors in the spirit world, doing psyops and things, but it's supposed to be for protection. It's supposed to be for the good of our country, things like that. What it ends up being is the opposite. Literally, they were, what I saw, they were making children into weapons. They were using spiritual gifts, to make changes in other countries, or who was running other countries, to cause harm to people. They were connecting those children with the high level demonic generals. And, so then really they're fulfilling Lucifer's military agenda versus our country's military agenda. So this was the extent that, I knew Aquino and Brennan to be involved in this. And they would hide.
Well, let me ask you then, because Aquino, I interviewed, and I asked him specifically. I said, "Have you ever, utilized children for your mind control work? You're so interested in mind control." And he said, "No, because children are not. They're too emotionally. How do you say? Like they're not. They're not in control of their emotions, so they're not good for mind control." So he was lying, or would he just not categorize it as mind control as far as the operational stuff that he was doing?
He didn't classify it as mind control. Mind control was the stuff Mengele and the Nazis were doing. What Aquino specifically did was, called mind construction. So with that, you in a way, you do gain control of the emotions. They teach children to have full control of those. Let me think how to put this. It's probably easier to give as an example. One that I give is, with this pandemic, they'll say, if you wear if you want to be a good citizen, if you're globally minded, you'll wear a mask. Because you care about your elderly neighbors, you care about the safety of the people around you. Well, so, your will may be, I don't want to wear a mask, I'm not going to wear a mask. But now what they've done is they've appealed to your ethical and your moral constructs. And so you think, if I don't wear a mask, then I'm not being a good person. And it displays that I don't care about my neighbors. I don't care about their life or their death. So, what is your will going to do? You want to be a good person. You want others to know that you care about them, that you care about life and death. So you're going to wear a mask. So that was his game. He played with the mind constructs to meld the will to people. He specifically hid a lot of things. The way they got away with not letting everybody know there were children involved is that and you can go through a lot of his stuff, he uses the word potential. Potential was the name that he gave for children. So as you read some of these experiments, go back and see how many times you see the word potential. He also hid, where the experiment records were kept. Legally, they're supposed to go through a facet of our government where the public, after a certain time, can request or, access those documents. And, we've got that system available. What he did was he created this project called the Transformation Project. The Transformation Project literally is the headquarters where they keep the unadapted forms of these experiments. So it does have all the pictures of the children. It has the pictures of them displaying them as weapons, selling them as weapons to other countries, displaying the things that they can do in the spirit world. So it's there in San Francisco, California, but no public person can, because it's a project, you can't just write and say, I want a copy of the Star Wars Now project unredacted, you know, because it's a project, it doesn't have to give full reveal. That's how he hid stuff. He admits it. He's
Yeah.
admitted
Oh
it
yeah.
on shows. He's admitted it in his books about the transformation project. Um,
So I'm just curious, would you say then Kathy O'Brien's testimony, as far as what you've seen of her story, does that resonate with anything that you went through specifically? Because it seems like she was used for a different purpose, more of a, you could, not like a born kind of thing, but more of a psychic. And you're more a psychic spy, and she was more being used for physical, how do you say, programs, operations, sexual slavery, this kind of stuff. But does that resonate with what you know about the projects?
Absolutely, yeah. She even names like the same entities that were over those projects. So Apollon, sometimes he was called Apollo or Abaddon. Fiona Barnett names that one as well, Apollo. Um, Aquino, even in his book, he lists the different, some of the different training centers that kids are put through. He worked hand in hand with Disney. Um, he worked with the Alpha Training Center for the CIA in Australia. He names areas that Kathy was put through. Um, so I would say her testimony is validated. It is what I saw of children that I would say I don't want to give class necessarily, but other kids that were in the program during my time were doing the same things that she talks about.
Indeed.
So the program was the same,
Right.
with a 20-year difference.
Now, you're familiar with Arizona Wilder's testimony. That was back in the 90s. Was she,
Mhm.
I can't remember if she said Mother of Darkness training as well, but
Mother goddess.
uh,
She was the mother goddess.
Mother Goddess. Okay, yeah. So, um, how does, yeah, exactly. How do you say, how does that connect to what you were doing specifically in terms of, um, she seems to have been involved with rituals and seeing, shape shifting, reptilian forms. Does this resonate with any of your experience?
Absolutely, yeah. So with her placement, what you have after you have the Satanic Council is that the system starts to break into departments that run the system in the different quadrants, both internationally and in the US. So the mother goddesses are going to be individuals who run the system, usually statewide. Usually they're over a state or over several cities, and they run all the covens for witches and warlocks that are in that state. So she would have been somebody who, was in charge of overseeing the rituals, the different things that are required of that occultic group in her regent. So that's how that would be classified. Um, as to, the shape shifting, I can speak to that, but I've never seen anybody who shape shifted into a reptilian. What I did see, I grew up with the protector. So those were individuals who were assigned to you to provide your protection. They provide it for all the elite. So at the higher levels, each person is going to be assigned a protector. These are individuals who, it goes back generations. So they have served the elite, for thousands of generations. They're born into this family. At age 5, they take their covenant or their first right. And with that first right, they inherit their family's generational spirits or entities that have helped them to do the things that they do as a protector. So they enter into that covenant with that spirit. Not all of those entities are shape-shifting entities, but some of them are. So, I grew up with, there were 6 departments for the protector assassins. And 2 of those departments, one is strongly run by the family lines that come out of the line of Rasputin, and they're werewolves. And so their shape-shifting demons allow them to change into that form. The 3rd department is the vampires. And so again, there you've got the family that comes from the Romanov line, and they are able to shapeshift into those entities at times. And again, we've talked about how at a quantum level, they've entered into a contract with this being. One of my close friends, when I talked to him the one time about that process, and I said, is it like you take a drink, or can you will it, or is it that spirit that wills it? Like, what causes the change, and does it physically happen, or is it like that it causes almost like a visual disturbance, that the people who are looking at you, it appears that you've changed, but you really haven't. Is the spirit changing the visual perception? And he said no. He said that it literally physically changes them. The signs of this, and there are disorders. So there's people that you can scientifically witness these disorders. But he said, the spirits will shift their bones, put them in different places. So then they end up with ligament, tendon, and, damage in those areas, a lot of joint issues. So it's kind of interesting when you look into that.
Indeed.
So
Well,
I would validate that,
yeah. Well,
her testimony on that.
You mentioned seeing Lucifer. So just when he spoke to you, did you see him, or what was his form? I'm just curious if you could describe it.
Yeah, I've seen him in 4 different forms. His first form is what I would classify as kind of like looking like a shadow of a man. So it just appears like this random shadow of a man wherever you're at. But it's more than just a shadow. Like he's got almost like this black covering, or I called it kind of his little crusty armor. So it'd be like the shadow with this crusty black armor on him. That was his first form. His second form is also as a man. And so that's the one you'll hear a lot of the brides of Satan talk about, where, he shows up in appearance as a very handsome man, glowing, kind of not like glowing, but it's kind of like he's got that glittery look, tanned look, very alluring, very attractive. And then the other 2 forms were both as different types of dragons. The one was just a one-headed dragon, and the other was a huge red dragon with 7 heads. So those were the 4 different forms I've seen him at different times. Usually he only appears as a dragon during certain rituals.
And so just talk about the Mother of Darkness, what this means essentially, like what was the intention? You mentioned Gloria Vanderbilt, whose son is Anderson Cooper, and certainly we know he's CIA background, but certainly comes across to me as some kind of bloodline bad guy. What does this mean to be part of the Mothers of Darkness? And what was that, you talk about building out the New World Order, the end times New World Order agenda. So it seems like it goes hand in hand, correct?
Right. So the mother's sole role is to kind of act as the CEOs of Lucifer's system. So, part of that role, one aspect is that they do all the spiritual gift testing. So they will whether it's through remote viewing, whether it's physically being present and doing tests on children, they will discern, what is that child's spiritual gift. They make the choice if a child, whether they're born bloodline or whether they're not bloodline, they'll decide if they want to put them into a position into the monarch programming. So usually you'll see, like, one of my experiences was that they would use different places like the Frank Lloyd Wright houses. They would use fairs that were going on at schools, and you would see, like, you'd have these events where all these teachers would be coming through with their classrooms, what looked like their classrooms, a teacher with a row of children, and they're all in nice neat rows, and looking at whatever they're supposed to be looking at. Well, the mother of darkness would walk past, and as she's walking past, that teacher, that handler, is watching her. And she either would nod her head, which would mean, yes, I want that child in the system. So that child then would be entered into the monarch programming. If she held up her finger as she passed that child, it meant that child was an expendable. They now, instead of being an insurance policy where they're, like the hierarchy children who are entered into the program, they are what ensures the system keeps operating, keeps going. Okay. The other kids, they call not my term, they call them the expendable children. They're their assets. They then are sold in different forms to make the system money. And so, they make that choice and that decision. Part of that is knowing the spiritual beings. They're very aware of what are the spiritual gifts of these different angelic hierarchy. And they're purposely looking for children that are going to be compatible with those spiritual hosts. And their job is to get them in the right program so that those children are then trained to operate in conjunction with those spiritual hosts. And the end time goal is to make them into, soldiers for Satan's army so that they can, get into heaven. So it's kind of, I don't know what else to say, but, it is a complicated process. Those are kind of their top roles, are just ensuring the running of that system. There's a lot of training, a lot of testing. Then you get into the whole aspect with Satan. As the CEOs, they are required to meet every single night with Satan, and he dictates, what the day, what the week, what the month's goals and plans are. And their job is to make sure that that happens. So, they're going to, each mother oversees one of the quadrants, both internationally as well as in the US. Underneath them, they're connected to the Satanic Council members for that quadrant. So that's going to be the heads of the family. So when Satan dictates an order, they're going to relay that order to the individuals under them. The Satanic Councilmen then are going to relay those orders to the Grand High Priest and High Priestesses. So those were individuals like Gloria Vanderbilt. She was a Grand High Priestess for the East Quadrant in the US. So, the mothers would relay it to the people who were over the Eastern Quadrant, which was George Soros, who then would dictate it to Gloria Vanderbilt. And then from her, she would dictate it to the high priest and priestesses who were underneath her. So, we see some of those connections. Marina Abramovic. We had, Madonna, Beyonce. Those individuals were all under Gloria Vanderbilt for the women. Then you have, beyond like the high priests and priestesses, then they're going to relay the messages to the departments. So you've got those who oversee the Satanists, those who oversee the Masons, the Kabbalah, the Mormons, and the Jesuit Catholics. And so those organizations then are where the programming happens. They each have a different aspect of the Monarch program. The Masons are the ones that are, and some of the higher level Jesuits are going to be connected to the military. And so the Monarch program in that system and department then has different names based on what positions the kids are being trained for. So you could have, you know, MK Ultra, you could have Project Gemini or Orion. Each of them are going to basically, they're all the Monarch program, but they're just different names. In the Jesuit system or the Catholic Church, that program is called the Carousel program. So if you get a hold of like Fritz Springmeier and Siska Wheeler's book, The Total Mind Control Program, she breaks down in that book some of those different names that MK Ultra goes under. So it's kind of like special classes, like, you know, you've got the overall umbrella of the program, but then it breaks into different classes or groups based on positions or specialties that those individuals will be learning and operating in.
And so this agenda, as what we understand it, is essentially what we've talked about with the New World Order. Essentially, the destruction of the nation state, basically the absorption of all power into one world banking, increased, this sort of corporate top-down control of life. This is the ultimate agenda that they've been moving towards. And where are we in that picture from your perspective? Both spiritually. I guess you could say, yeah, I mean, spiritually, energetically, it feels to me like they're actually at their end. And it doesn't feel like they are winning, even though they perpetuated this life, how do you say? They perpetuated this false system, but I feel like it's coming to its end. So, and obviously someone like yourself feeling the power of God, you were chosen basically to be worked out of it. To me, there's always this higher power of God's universe that ultimately is the living universe, that is what the dark side is feeding upon. It's just, it doesn't, evil itself is the inversion of life. So it's essentially been promoting the ego of these power hungry psychopaths. But ultimately that system is sort of coming to its end itself. The end time is that system, the Antichrist system that we now see right en masse. And then it's like, this is basically where it goes to die. When it rolls out its full form, that's sort of its final hurrah, it feels to me.
Yeah, I would agree. We are in the final hurrahs. And, just like you said, you do, above all, we have God who's sovereign over all things. And he's dictated, from the very beginning, the beginning and the end of creation. And he put things in place. So he did decree that there would be an antichrist. He would allow that. He would allow this period of time where Lucifer gets to run his kingdom, and he has dominion over the earth. And we see, what we kind of see in the process of happening right now was that just this past year, April 24th, 2020, part of the mother's job was to hand that system, it was a matriarchal system before that where, Satan dictated his power to the mothers. But on April 24th, that system was put into the hands of the Antichrist. So now it's changed hands from a matriarchal run system to a patriarchal run system. And it's meant to be a mockery. In scripture, you have the Father God who had his son, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, who he gives control and power and authority of his kingdom to. And what does Jesus do with it? He places it back under the feet of the Father. So in the same way, the book of Revelations tells us that who does Satan give the power of his kingdom to? He gives it to the Antichrist. And that Antichrist job then is to rule that kingdom, to bring it to a certain point, and to put it back under Satan's control. And there's very specific things that are outlined in the book of Revelations that we haven't seen happen yet. It talks about that, the Antichrist has control of this kingdom now, but it will get to the point where he will stand in the temple of Israel and he will declare himself God. We haven't seen that happen yet. And it's after that happens that then he breaks out and makes war against the saints of God. And he will go after every single one who claims to be on that side of God to kill and destroy. And that's also part of Satan's end time agenda. He wants to kill all the Christians. Then he's going to use those who've served him to host his demonic army to get him through those gates. And then he's going to destroy them also. He just plans to get through those gates with his demonic army and nobody else. So all those things we still, we're in that end period. The last things are happening, but I wouldn't say like we're right at the end. And again, I wouldn't say the enemy's won, because we already know the outcome of the story, that we have the victory. And, so that's part of what the Lord's called me to do, is that understanding how the system operates, how it works, understanding what the enemy's doing, get that knowledge out there, to get the Christians and the people who are standing up against the system to stand up together. We're not helpless. We don't have to just lay down and die. We can fight this enemy. And one of the greatest ways we can fight is by getting those who are in the system out of the system. If Satan doesn't have individuals who can host his demonic army, he's not going to be very effective in his end time agenda. So that's been part of my goal, is to target the system from the inside, to go after his highest players and to bring those players out, because then those hosts, they're not getting the people that they operate with the best. If they're choosing people, it's those who, that they don't function with best. And, those people are out of that 5% that really want to be in the system, So yeah, it's interesting.
What happened? So you mentioned April of 2020 or 2021 when you say it was something about the system was inaugurated, you're saying?
Yeah, the Antichrist was, so the system changed hands on that date. There were a series of end time rituals that I partook in as a child that, we were preparing for those end time rituals. So, Lucifer is very picky. He wants all of his rituals to be absolutely perfect. So these things that are happening now, when I was a kid, I was practicing for these things. And it would be the rituals, like you were learning what's supposed to happen, where you're supposed to stand. So there was a series of prophetic books called the Books of the Mothers. And each of the books were opened at a different time. So it actually started in June of 2019. And so I knew, like we were trained, that as soon as that first book is opened, then there were certain dates when the next ones would follow. The final book to be opened was the 5th book. And that was part of my job, was to open that book, which would mean that you open it and you read the prophecies that are within it. And I just knew, that whenever that first one got opened, the following April was when that fifth book was to be opened. It's these are very interesting books. They've been kept at a Catholic church, St. Peter's in Rockford, Illinois, for centuries, and they're not by no means your normal type of book. They're made. I don't know how graphic I won't get too graphic on here, but they're made from human skin. So all the pages are human skin, and they're what we call living books. So there's a spiritual entity that literally embodies the book. And so if you were to open the pages, they would be blank. And the books have to be connected with the individual who's supposed to be able to see or read those prophecies before the event happens. So as a child, we went through a special ritual where each of the mothers were connected by blood to one of these books. And it's your blood that opens the prophecy. And once your blood is applied on the page, the words will appear for you to read. So,
like the Necronomicon, by the way.
Yes, very, very similar. That also is a living book. So, yeah, so those were some of the preparatory rituals that we went through for that. So what happened this April was that I did not show, I did not open the book. And in fact, things were done to make sure that it was not opened. Each of the prophecies within it were meant to kind of, again, be a mockery of the life of Christ. So you had with the first book, it anointed the Antichrist with his birth. The second book was about his baptism. With the third book, he was commissioned, which means called. With the fourth book, he went through a period of temptation. And with the fifth book, he was to be consummated into his position. So that fifth step never happened, but still he took his place. And, he's kind of, I don't know if it'd be operating half mast then, or, what the spiritual complications are going to be for him with that. But things did not go as they had planned. So.
It's fascinating. So basically, their time is short. We get that. Their time is short.
Yeah.
And again, so do you think that just the people that you referred to, that are basically part of this, this cabal and these bloodline families, do you think that they're even like have consciousness and an awareness that, essentially that they are serving something that is ultimately dark, and they are just, are they possessed in a sense, do you think, by it, or do they just have no conscience left? I mean, are their souls are they even in possession of their souls at this point?
At the highest levels, yes, they are in possession of their souls, and they do know exactly what they're doing. They're very aware. As you get into those who are programmed, their souls are still in their bodies, but the control is an issue because they may have, they're battling with entities for the use of their own body. Those entities are able to control to an aspect. So sometimes they do, black out, and they have no idea what their body's been used for. They have no memories of what they've done, where they've been. The spirit does not allow that. Sometimes they have built-in altars or programs in their mind where, they've got different personalities or different, I'm trying to think how to describe that. A lot of times it's called DID for dissociative disorder, or multiple personalities was the old name for it. So basically the system would build these different compartments within the mind, where it almost was like you could be like 10 different individuals living within one body, yet it's all you, but you see yourself in different ways, and you can't, each one is distinct, so you don't realize that you've got these other personalities as well living within you. And then, your handler or the person controlling you, you would use access codes or different trigger things. It could be as simple as walking by you wearing a red scarf, and you were trained that when you see that red scarf, your beta kitty sex worker personality is pulled up. And then as that personality is pulled up, you could be programmed or wired to have certain jobs that you would fulfill, or they may give you a job. So one of the ladies that I knew, they, like, one time, they got her at a gas station. And so what happened is a guy just pulled up and he was like, hey, that guy over there just gave me a note. Well, she went to look and there wasn't a guy, but he put in her hand this note. And when she saw the note, it had the trigger word on it. And it made her, that beta kitty, come out. And she knew then, she was programmed that when she was triggered, then she would go to the Masonic Lodge at a certain time, and that's where they would pimp her out. So it just depends on where in the system the person is, whether it's conscious or not conscious, and how controlled they are, or what spirits have control of them.
I think that explains a lot. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only final question I have is, you just describe some of the magical battles that you have witnessed or involved with. Can you explain how that plays out essentially for people that, they think of it like as a Harry Potter reality, right? The fact that this magic is real, and essentially it's like we are living in a multidimensional reality, right?
Right.
That's the essence of it.
Yeah, that's the reality of it, is that, we have the physical world, but we have the spiritual world as well. And all of us are created to function in both of those realms together. But we, from a young age, they use words. It's part of the programming, like if you're seeing somebody as a kid and you tell your mom, hey, I saw that person, what's the first response you get? Oh, is that your imagination? Is that your imaginary friend? You may see this person or being multiple times, and yet every time you're going to be told that's your imagination, that it's not real. You may even be able to hear, see, and interact with that being or person, and you're still told it's not real. So you're taught to doubt your gifts and your abilities in those realms. So kind of remind me again, where
Yeah, just in terms of
multidimensional.
how those magical battles essentially work.
Yeah. So it varies in levels. It could be, I guess it depends if, they're calling you into an operation, or if from the Lord's perspective, it was really different for me as a kid, because, they would throw us into a room, and there would be, individuals in there that might be defectors, people who are trying to run and get out of the system. So what would happen is they'd have those persons chained or somehow stuck in this room that would be completely dark in a basement. And we'd go walking, and next thing we know, we'd get shoved into this room, and the door gets locked behind me and my training partner. And they're saying through the keyhole, either you guys live or he lives. Okay, so now we know there's someone else in the room. And that's the whole thing, is that you would be forced to fight to the death. Only either the kids or the guy walks out, one or the other. And that was kind of their way of punishing people. And so that was the physical aspect of this battle, is that you were entering into physical fighting. That's why we had Michael Karkok, who was the defense legion leader of the Nazis, train us. We had to know how to defend and protect ourselves in the physical aspect of the battle. But then you have the whole demonic witchcraft side. You've got spirits that are, that person who's defecting out of the system is a trained high-level witch, warlock, that sometimes it was a wolf or a vampire. So now you're dealing not only with the physical person, but you've also got these beings who can do things in the physical world. So you're fighting multiple individuals in this battle. And, they teach you, things like spells or hexes or, invocations. You're taught to summon demons that will fight for you or with you. So the demons will battle amongst themselves for power. In the end, whoever wins that battle then has possession or has soul ties now with that other person's spirits that they were connected to. So you gain more spirits allegiance. Whoever the top dog in the battle is gets the allegiance of the demonic army. So the higher spirits, if you're fighting just against low-level soldier spirits, you could have thousands upon thousands of those guys. Okay, but those guys, if they have to fight against a demonic general, they're not going to get very far because they're not skilled in battle, versus the demonic generals are very skilled, and usually they just enter the field and these little guys see them and they run, like little chickens, because they're scared. And so early on, as we were in this, I remember one day, we were playing chess at Gloria Vanderbilt's house while we were waiting to take place in one of these battles. And I looked at my training partner and I was like, why are we even physically fighting the humans? Like, we see the demonic general, like Bible says, says heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and cast out the demons. Why are we just not casting out the demon? If we cast out the demon, these people have no power besides their physical abilities. And it's like, we're highly trained in defense. So, most of them are not trained like we are in defense. So why don't we just attack those demonic generals? And so we started doing that. Like, we would just go in and that would be our focus, was taking out that general, rebuking them, getting them off the field. And once we did that, the witches, the warlocks, they're so used to that, summoning those invocations. They're used to that, supernatural power coming through their spiritual gifts, through that spirit that they're working in conjunction with. It's like, it's relatable to when you take out that demon, it's like taking away their sword and their bow and arrow. They're highly trained in doing battle a certain way. So when you take away their main weapon, they don't know how to function in the battle. And it throws them off, and you have that period where they're thrown off, they don't know what to do. And that's when we were able to overcome them and, win the battle. And so, this is at the higher levels, and anybody is able to do this if you're trained. The majority of it comes through knowing what your weapons through the Word of God is. Which that's one of our weapons, is being able to rebuke these spirits. We can rebuke these entities. We can cast them out. We can bind them. And we can take away, they're all given dominion over pieces of land. Like that's why they connect with human beings. The more human beings they're connected to, as we talked about, wherever the sole of your feet tread, the Lord gives you that land as a possession. And so these spirits and entities are greedy. They want as much as they can get. So they're going to connect to as many people across the quadrants as they're allowed to. But as you target them and rebuke them and anoint and take back that property, they have nothing. They have no foothold to stand on. Scripture says the righteous inherit the land. So we have that authority to come in and, to rebuke them, to remove their stronghold. Once we remove the strong man, then we have the ability to remove whatever he was operating in wickedness. So that includes the child trafficking, it includes the different strongholds that they put people under, the sexual sins, the drugs, the drinking, pornography, whatever the stronghold is. You have the right then to remove that stronghold from the land and to remove, scripture talks about it, that those strongholds are like oppression over people. And, so as you go into an area, whatever strongholds are there are going to oppress you and tempt you and, weaken you until you give in and you give way to those demons and their strongholds over you. But if we do the opposite, we go in, we take the stronghold, we take possession, then that's where we see healing in the land. We see that wickedness stops. It's forced to stop. We can stop the child trafficking, we can stop the drug addictions, we can, stop the people who are running those things and bring in the things that are good and right and build our communities that are healthy and safe for our kids.
Yes, exactly. It's a choice. It's always a choice. This is an amazing conversation. I mean, we could go, it's like this could go for hours. It's already been, I think, almost an hour and a half. And I really appreciate the insights and the time you've given us today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
shared a lot. You've shared a lot, and it's a lot to take in and absorb and just reflect on, because ultimately, yes, this is it's a multidimensional war that we have to come to accept. That's really the message that I'm looking to convey with the documentary and with most of the work I do. It's like, this is not just about physical material existence. That is the lie that's been sold to many people for too long, that
Right.
this is just the physical evolutionary process of random chance, and we're just a random species on a random planet. No, this is exactly what we are. We are chosen for this time and this moment, and it's time for us to answer the call.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing with us, and definitely we look forward to the upcoming content. You got a lot of things to share and more elaboration. So we'll leave it to the other videos to elaborate into more detail. But I think this is a great overview.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.